Americanah. The novel Americanah is written by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. The story is about a woman named Ifemelu whose roots are Nigerian. She falls in love with a Nigerian man, Obinzi. Ifemelu suddenly gets presented an opportunity to move to the United States due to a scholarship. Obinzi then moves to London as an illegal immigrant. When Ifemelu moved to the United States, she started dating a guy named Blaine, but when she moved back to Nigeria, she broke up with him. Ifemelu stayed in the USA for 13 years before moving home to Nigeria.
And now for the environment. There are described 3 different environments in the novel. The first one is based on the United States in Princeton, where she lives. This is an incredibly wealthy environment with a very limited number of non-African Americans. Then the novel focuses on the environment in the metro, where the further and further away they come from Princeton, or she comes from Princeton, the more privileged, posh white people get off the train, whereas all the black, fat people, as she calls them, are sitting and staying on the train. Then the novel also focuses on the environment in the African hair salon in Trenton. This is a small, creepy salon which is placed disguised between 2 major buildings. The environment is far less wealthy than Princeton, which is described just shortly first. The holes in the walls are also closed with moldy newsprints. The air conditioning hasn't worked for a long time, although the owner claims it was working fine just yesterday. And then the last environment is when she's talking about Nigeria. This is a lot poorer environment than what she is used to living in Princeton, and the people in Nigeria is also living a completely different lifestyle. And now for our characters. Our first and main character is Ifemelu. She's the one we follow throughout the chapter, and she's born and raised in Nigeria. She then later on decides to move to the United States for her education. In the States, she has made a living by writing her successful blog. Her successful blog is about living as a non-American black person who lives in the United States and she doesn't let anyone affect her. She gets inspired by all her surroundings and could sit at a cafe all day and observe people while she thinks about their lives and how they might be. Then we have the next character, which is Obinzi. Obinzi is Ifemelu's first love. She described him as someone who she still sees as a big part of her life. He's now married and has wonderful children and has also worked up the social rank to be a more wealthy man. The next person is then Auntie Uju. She's Ifemelu's only family member in the United States. She was incredibly unsympathetic when she heard about Ifemelu's decision to return to Nigeria, as the quality of her life was significantly lower in Nigeria. Then there's Blaine, who was Ifemelu's boyfriend. He's a professor at Yale and also adores Barack Obama, which is something that they have in common. But she decided to break up with him since she figured out that she wanted to go back to Nigeria. Then next we have Mariama. Mariama is a hardworking woman who owns the salon in Trenton, which Ifemelu went to get her hair braided. The last person is Aisha. She is this Senegalese hardworking woman in the hair salon, where she works under her boss, Mariama. She's described as a true market woman who does not have much left to be service-minded. She becomes convinced that Ifemelu can convince her to marry her men to marry her because Ifemelu and her are from the same religion or region in Nigeria. They're all 3 from Agbo. Aisha then chooses to call the men against Ifemelu's will and then invites them over to the salon. Now for the narrator's point of view. The novel is written from a third-person narrative that tells the story of Ifemelu. The narrator knows of and tells the thoughts of Ifemelu, but does not go into depth of the other characters' thoughts. An example of this is for example, that the ice cream eating man sat beside her on the train, and to discourage conversation, she stared fixedly at a brown stain near her feet, a spilled frozen frappuccino, until they arrived at Trenton.
Primarily, Ifemelu's life one follows through the novel, as well as minor side stories about Ifemelu's aunt's life, aunt's husband, friends, and so on. Flashbacks also have helped shape the mood of the story, giving the reader a picture of the life of Ifemelu. In fact, much of the novel is written in flashback, as Ifemelu has her hair braided in a New Jersey salon in preparation for going home to Nigeria after 13 years in America, during which she has witnessed Barack Obama's election victory. Flashbacks are also part in the atmosphere of the story, which gives a picture of Ifemelu's background and previous life experiences. Such as years ago, she had been asked a familiar question at a wedding, which is on page 1913, last line. Based on what we have read in chapter 1, the story follows a chronological order. Ifemelu lives a more modern life than the life of her friends and family in Nigeria. Ifemelu stays in the United States after her study time and starts an anonymous blog there. After this, she becomes well known, and she starts using the blog to reflect upon racial issues, identity, language, and how the people around her communicate with each other. She also uses the blog to reflect upon the black skin color and how it is often considered as just black, despite the many shades of skin tone. So she moves to America and starts a blog and decides to move back after 13 years. The language was very basic, meaning it was an everyday way of writing with no slang. But Aisha, the Senegal hairdresser had harder time speaking American English fluently, as we can hear on page 21, seventh last line. No, I call them. You tell them Igbo can marry not Igbo. This indicates that she has recently come to America as an immigrant to earn some money, for instance. The sentences have a paratactic sentence structure, where some of the sentences are quite short and have been indented with connectives such as but, and or. An example can already be seen on page 3, but she did not like that she had to go to Trenton to braid her hair. This was the example. Adjectives were especially used recurrently, which can also be read on page 3, such as she liked the campus draped with knowledge, the Gothic buildings with their wine-laced walls, and the way everything transformed in the half-light of night into a ghostly scene, which is the 11th last line. The objective of the comparative method is to find similarities and differences that explain certain circumstances in the cases or studies we compare. The methodological is that we systematically apply a societal conceptual device to the comparison of social conditions. There may be studies of countries, cities, organizations, economic phenomena, and so on. The novel The Namaske by Jumbo Lahiri is similar to Africanah. Ifemelu and even Obinse, who makes his own brief immigration to England during the novel, has trouble holding on to her seemingly dueling identities: the Nigerian girl who came of age during times of trouble in her native country, and the American student who is known for her zippy and incisive blog of Ivy League scholarships. Lahiri's novel similarly addresses those problems, tracking the Gangali family as they all try to fit into the American life, while not abandoning the Indian background that still shapes them. So here the question is also if the Gangali family can be both Indian and American. In both of the novels, the main roles belong to the middle class. They went from lower social class to the middle, so the living standards were similar.
We analyzed the difference between Nigeria and the US with Hofstede's theory, and all the numbers we will present are taken from gathofstede.com. This theory gives a great understanding of the societies with different values and backgrounds, and it also gives a good understanding about why the author had given the characters their behavior and actions. Nigeria has a power distance of 80, whereas the US only has half of it, 40. This means that Nigerians have more respect for authorities, and there's a big difference between the wealthiest and the poorest, while Americans are more equal. In individualism, the US scores 91, which is very high, and Nigeria scores only 30. Nigerians are very loyal to their families and communities, while Americans are more independent. In the story, we also see how Ifemelu's close connections are family members or people from the African American community. Both countries score around average in masculinity, which indicates that they are result-driven while being feminine and caring about happiness and harmony in their country. Here, Ifemelu is a fantastic example. She moved to the US to gain success, and her blog shows her great independence and willpower. Considering long-term orientation, the US scores 26 while Nigeria scores 13. This shows that they both are nationalistic and proud of their country, but the US orientate themselves more around future prospects. Nigeria are more normative than pragmatic and focus greatly on their traditions. In the novel, we see how Aisha has been told that Igbo only marries Igbo. This is just an example of the traditions they value, and it's very old-fashioned. Nigeria scores highly on indulgence with 84, which means they are great at appreciating life as it is and are generally positive, compared to the US, which is 68. In the novel, we see how Ifemelu appreciates life, she's optimistic, and in the salon where everything is dirty and falling apart, she doesn't care and she'd expected it anyway. Also, the fact that she moved to the US for better opportunities shows the high level of indulgence. We chose to use biografisk metode as the time and society in which the story forms can be significant that one is not aware of and thus gain a better understanding of the story. A disadvantage of biografisk metode is that you can move the attention towards the author throughout the story and thus ignore the linguistic and substantive meaning. In many cases, the work is bigger than the author, and it may be a limitation to look at the story's prerequisites in the author's life. Though, in combination with other methods, biografisk metode is often rewarding and interesting. Chimamanda is a novel and short story author. The author's book deals with people with strong connections to Nigeria, especially from the Lagos area of the country. There is a strong emphasis on the suppression of the female gender, which the author is highly opposed to since she is a proud feminist. Ifemelu is an independent student who has moved from her home country to pursue an education. There is a clear connection between Chimamanda and the story. According to VODCAST, it appears that the author herself was born and raised in the southeastern Nigeria with a group of 6 siblings. It also points out that the author herself comes from an academic middle class and that education was mandatory for all the children. When Chimamanda was 19 years old, she moved to the US to escape from her medical studies due to her being more interested in history. This also appears in the text where Ifemelu, the main character, moved to the United States on the basis of a scholarship that was awarded to her. When reading the chapter 1, one also reads that Ifemelu's acquaintance with a man named Obinsi, who falls in love with. To this day, Chimamanda is married and lives her life between the United States and Nigeria. Furthermore, it appears from VODCAST that the novel is not about Chimamanda herself, but from her memories during the dictatorship in Nigeria. Based on this knowledge, it is clear that there are several events from Chimamanda's life that is described in the novel. As an example, Chimamanda is a feminist, and in Americanah, there is an emphasis on hair, which is of great importance. How it is braided, how it is treated, how it burns, and whether or not one has hair relaxation. Ifemelu goes against these black beauty ideals by keeping her natural hairstyle and choosing color 4 instead of color 1, since color 4 reflects her own hair color the most. This is a way of showing the feminism and that everyone should accept each other as they are and accept yourself as you are.
We could also have applied the formalist method, where this method sees the text as autonomous, meaning ignoring factors outside the text, such as author information, as it is the text alone, which is the center of the analysis. Since the text is supposed to contain all the information required to interpret the text, the method sets the requirements for near-reading, a careful and systematic review of the smallest parts of the text, words and images, and their relationship with the overall text of the text. Composition, narrative, genre, and motive, such as, and also attitude and idea, for instance. The text is seen as a number of layers that are used as questions in the analysis work. The text determines which layer is relevant to put out. The summary of the layers in a text is not a text analysis model, where all layers should be included in the analysis, but only an overview of what might be interesting to investigate. It's about being responsive to the statements of the text.
This is something you can still experience in America today, in California, LA, a sudden change in the types of people you see on the street. It goes from you seeing wealthy people from the upper social caste to you easily being able to distinguish between them and the ones belonging to the lower social caste, such as ghettos. So what Chimamanda describes in her book is something that can still be experienced today all around the world.